He sold his war medals for $250, just to fix an old truck and survive one more week. But when a widow saw his name in an online auction, everything changed. She remembered the man who saved her husband, and her son had the power to change his life forever. The morning sun broke through the windshield of Mike Riley's truck, hitting his face like a silent reminder that he'd fallen asleep in the driver's seat again. The torn seat reeked of sweat, and the battery, by the look of the dead dashboard, had finally given out overnight. Mike, 53, rubbed his eyes and sat up, his back stiff from another night parked at the edge of a truck stop lot in Sedalia, Missouri. His old Chevy Silverado leaned slightly to one side, rear axle damage he couldn't afford to fix. On the passenger seat lay a folded tarp, a half-empty thermos, and an envelope marked with the unpaid bill from Krantz Diesel Repair. More than $900. He sighed and reached behind the seat, pulling out a battered tin box, military green, the edges scuffed, the latch rusted but still firm. Inside, nestled between foam padding and yellowed newspaper, were his medals. Bronze Star, a Distinguished Service Cross, a unit patch from a deployment in Al-Anbar. Things he hadn't looked at in years, but couldn't bring himself to throw away. Until now. He took a picture with his flip phone, grainy and dim, and uploaded it to a classified site at the local library. The post read, "Selling military medals. Gulf War era. $300 or best offer. No trades." He left his number and closed the page before he could talk himself out of it. 2 days passed. Then a call. "Hi," the voice said, soft and polite. "My name's Eugene. I collect military history. I saw your post." They met in the parking lot of the local VFW. Mike didn't want strangers seeing inside his truck. Eugene arrived in a Navy sedan, wore a cardigan in the summer heat, and handled the medals like glass. He examined each one silently, with something closer to reverence than appraisal. Mike expected haggling, but instead, Eugene opened his worn wallet and pulled out a folded stack of 20s. "I only have $250 on me. I know it's less than you asked, but it's real. No games." Mike hesitated, felt wrong, like selling a part of himself. But the truck wouldn't fix itself. And if he missed one more delivery, the produce company would drop him. So he nodded. "Deal." Eugene handed him the cash and carefully wrapped the medals back in their paper. Now his. Mike didn't watch him leave. Later that night, he sat in the front seat again, staring at the empty glove box where the tin box had once rested. He told himself it was just metal. Symbols. Nothing had changed. But something had. 2 states away, in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago, Rachel Banks was leafing through a photo album when a notification buzzed on her phone. She usually ignored the forum posts. Her account on the Veteran Spouses Network had been dormant for months. But the subject line caught her. Gulf War Medals. Rare Convoy insignia from Anbar. Rachel opened the thread, clicking through the attached images. The first thing she saw was the Bronze Star. The second was the name engraved along the edge. Michael J. Riley. Her breath caught. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Adam had told her about him once. Mike from the Convoy. The sergeant who got them through the supply route outside Fallujah. The one who took shrapnel shielding the others. Adam never spoke about the war in full sentences, only fragments. But he said Mike's name with something like quiet awe. Rachel zoomed in on the photo, her throat tight. She reread the post, then sent a message before she could second-guess herself. Eugene checked his inbox 3 hours later. Her message was short. "Hello. I think I know the man these belong to. He saved my husband's life. Can we talk?" He responded that evening. They spoke over the phone, Eugene describing the man he'd met in Missouri. Quiet, weary, proud. Said he'd been driving independent loads. Didn't say much else. But I could tell it wasn't easy for him. Rachel pressed him for more. "Do you still have his number?" He paused. "I do. But I don't share that information lightly." "I understand," she said gently. "But if I don't reach him, these medals might be all that's left." There was silence on the line. Then Eugene said, "Give me a few hours. I'll ask him if he's open to contact." That night, Mike parked behind a shuttered grain warehouse just off Route 50. He counted the cash one more time, then looked over his mileage log. One more job, maybe two, before he could pay Krantz the deposit. Maybe get the truck stable enough to cross into Kansas next week. Then his phone buzzed. Eugene calling. He stared at it for a few rings before answering. I hope this isn't over the medals, Mike said flatly. It's not about money. Someone saw them, a woman. Said she knew your name. Her husband served with you. She wants to talk. She said you saved him. His name was Adam Banks. The line went quiet. Mike sat back, eyes closed. Yeah, he finally said. I remember Adam. Back in Chicago, Rachel opened her inbox again. There it was. Mike said yes. He'll meet you. She closed her eyes and whispered, thank you. Somewhere on a dark Missouri road, Mike folded his phone shut and stared ahead into the night. He didn't know why she was reaching out. He didn't know what she wanted. But after a long time, someone was calling him by name, and not for a pickup. And that mattered. The diner was quiet that afternoon. Just a low hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional clink of silverware from the far end of the counter. Mike chose a corner booth, back to the wall, habit from years of watching exits. He wore a clean button-down, sleeves rolled once, and the same faded jeans that had seen 100 loading docks. His boots were scuffed, his eyes tired. He wasn't sure why he'd said yes to this meeting. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe because when Eugene said her name, something in Mike's memory jolted like a surge through dead wiring. Rachel arrived 5 minutes late. She paused by the entrance, scanning the booths until she found him. A woman in her late 40s, with shoulder-length dark hair streaked with a quiet gray, and a firm grace to the way she moved. She wore no makeup. Her clothes were simple, a pale blue blouse and dark jeans. But she carried herself like someone who'd held grief in one hand and life in the other and learned to balance both. Mike stood out of habit. She extended a hand. Mike Riley? She asked, her voice soft but steady. He nodded and shook it gently. Rachel Banks. They sat. Neither spoke for a moment. The waitress came and poured coffee, and Rachel thanked her, then reached into her purse. She laid a single photo on the table. The edges were soft, worn. A younger man in uniform stood in a sun-blasted desert, arm draped over the shoulders of another soldier. Mike recognized the second man as himself, tired, squinting, arm in a sling. Rachel pointed to the smiling man beside him. That's Adam. Mike's breath caught in his throat. I remember that day. We just made it through Route Viking. Road was so hot it peeled rubber. Rachel gave a small, sad smile. He told me everything. Not all at once, but enough. Said you dragged him behind a Humvee when the convoy was ambushed. They gave him a medical discharge 6 months later. Mike's jaw worked. I always wondered what happened after. He made it home okay. She nodded slowly. We had 9 more years. He was never quite the same, but he lived. He was a good father. A good man. Mike stared at the photo. I never got to say goodbye. I think you already did, she said. When you pulled him out of that kill zone. They sat in silence, coffee cooling in their cups. Then, Rachel reached into her bag again and pulled out the tin box. Mike froze. I got them back from Eugene, she said. The moment I saw your name, I bought them. I wasn't going to let those pieces of you end up on a shelf somewhere. Mike didn't take the box at first. He just looked at it, like it might vanish. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. He reached forward, fingers grazing the lid. These were the last things I had from that life. And now, I don't know, he said. Feels like I don't fit anywhere. Not in a uniform. Not behind a wheel. Not in some cinderblock motel room wondering if I've got one more haul in me. Rachel tilted her head. I think you still have more to give. You just need someone to believe it, too. They started meeting every week. Rachel would drive down from Chicago, sometimes bringing care packages, sometimes just conversation. They'd sit at that same booth, talking about nothing and everything, about Adam, about the war, about how hard it was to get out of bed when your purpose felt like it had been boxed and shelved. Mike listened more than he spoke. But slowly, something softened in him. The way Rachel looked at him. Not like he was broken, but like he still mattered. Chipped away at the walls he'd built over years of silence and roadside motels. One day, Rachel mentioned a veterans outreach group she volunteered with. They're starting a vocational program, she said, helping guys transition into logistics, warehouse management, even truck driving again. Mike chuckled dryly. Those programs don't want old dogs like me. She sipped her tea. Maybe they just need the right example. Back in Chicago, Daniel Banks stood in his father's old office, flipping through a box of letters. Rachel had mentioned Mike in passing, but Daniel had barely listened. He was busy, between investor meetings, software launches, and managing a tech firm with hundreds of employees. There wasn't much time left for stories from a war he'd never known. But now, holding those letters, yellowed envelopes with smudged stamps and stiff paper written in careful block handwriting, Daniel slowed. One line stopped him cold. If I don't make it out of this, tell Mike Riley he saved more than my life. He reminded me who I was. Daniel read it 3 times. That night, he stood in the kitchen while his mother poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. How much do you trust him? He asked. She looked up. Mike. Daniel nodded. Rachel paused. With everything. He nodded slowly, then walked into the den and closed the door behind him. A moment later, he picked up his phone. The call was brief, to a friend in freight logistics, someone he trusted. Just a question, really. What would it take? Daniel asked. To get a man like Mike back on the road, not just driving, leading something bigger. Daniel Banks arrived at the small diner on the outskirts of Missouri late one afternoon, just as the golden light of sunset spread across the cracked pavement. Mike was already there, sitting at the same corner booth where he met Rachel. He looked tired but determined, a man who had been worn down by life, but not quite broken. Daniel slid into the booth across from him, a soft smile on his face. He had a crisp air about him, his clothes pressed, his shoes polished. He could afford to look neat to be neat, but it wasn't lost on him that Mike's world was different. It was a world of grease stains, grit, and the constant hum of an engine running low on gas. I've been thinking about it, Daniel said, setting down a file folder on the table. He leaned forward, speaking with the casual confidence of someone who had always been able to turn ideas into reality. You don't have to keep working for pennies. You've got the skills, the drive, and I think you could do something bigger. Mike looked at him, his brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Daniel slid the folder across the table. I want to start a freight company, but not just any company. I want to create something that matters. A company that brings veterans back into the workforce, that gives them a purpose, just like you gave Adam a purpose when you saved him. Mike's hands gripped the edge of the table as he studied Daniel's face. He'd never thought of it that way. For years, he had been trying to make ends meet, living in the shadow of what once was. Now, this young man, the son of the man he saved, was offering him the chance to lead something bigger than himself. Convoy Banks, Daniel said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. It would be a veteran-operated company, with you at the helm. You'd hire veterans, train them, and run the show, but we'll do it with values. Not just to make a buck, but to create something that can change lives. Mike leaned back, the weight of the idea settling over him like a heavy coat. He shook his head slowly. You sure you want me running this thing? I'm no businessman. I'm just a truck driver, Daniel. You're more than that, Daniel replied, his voice steady. You've led men through hell and back. You've made the hard decisions when others froze. That kind of leadership doesn't fade. Mike swallowed, looking down at the folder, then up at Rachel, who had been quietly watching. She gave him a nod of encouragement, her eyes soft yet firm. Mike, she said gently, you've led before. You saved lives. Now you have the chance to lead again, but this time you can save more than just a few. You can help other veterans just like you helped Adam. Mike felt his chest tighten. The road ahead wasn't clear. He wasn't sure if he could carry the weight of this responsibility. But deep down, there was something stirring in him, the part of him that used to believe in a cause, in something bigger than himself. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice low but resolute. I'll lead the convoy. The first few weeks were filled with planning, long nights in the small office Daniel rented, and stacks of paperwork. Mike and Daniel worked side by side, outlining the logistics, scouting for veteran recruits, and laying the groundwork for the fledgling company. Rachel helped where she could, reaching out to her network of veteran support groups, while Daniel pulled strings with investors and sponsors. But it didn't take long for trouble to find them. As the plans for Convoy Banks began to take shape, it quickly drew the attention of Daniel's board of executives at BanksTech. The corporate world didn't see the same vision Daniel did. They saw a vanity project, a risky, unprofitable venture that would tarnish the company's reputation if it failed. Vanessa Kerr, a senior vice president at BanksTech, was the most vocal in her opposition. From the beginning, she had dismissed the idea as a feel-good distraction, and now that the project was gaining traction, she took every opportunity to undermine it. She blocked the initial funding, delayed the signing of contracts, and even leaked internal doubts to the press, questioning the viability of a veteran-led freight company. The media buzzed with skepticism, and public support began to wane. Mike could feel the pressure mounting. The calls from sponsors dwindled, and the weight of failure seemed to hang over them. Daniel was relentless, but even he began to show cracks, his usual confidence replaced by frustration. "We're not giving up," Daniel said one evening, pacing after dinner in his apartment. "We're going to prove them wrong. We'll get the funding, we'll find the trucks, and we'll make this work." But it wasn't enough to just have the vision. They needed support, and fast. That was when Deshawn walked in. Deshawn was a former Marine, a single father who had been struggling to find steady work since leaving the service. He had a quiet strength about him, the kind that came from hard days and even harder nights. When Mike had recruited him, he'd been hesitant, unsure of his place in the world after the military. Now, Deshawn stood in the doorway of their makeshift office, his eyes steady. "You quitting?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge of challenge. "Then who do we follow?" The question hung in the air. Mike looked at him, then at Daniel, who stood beside him, watching the exchange. "We're not quitting," Mike said, his voice firm. "We're not gonna let them bury this." Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll personally fund it," he said. "I'll get the money. We're doing this, and if we fail on our terms." With Daniel's commitment to fund the venture personally, the Convoy project moved forward. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still hurdles to jump, people to convince, and resources to gather. But the dream of Convoy Banks was alive. And this time, they weren't just driving towards a destination. They were driving for something that mattered. As Mike looked around at the small, motley group of veterans they had gathered, he felt the weight of the responsibility once more. But it didn't scare him. It ignited something in him. Something he had forgotten was still there. It was time to lead again. The lot outside the new Convoy Bank's headquarters was already being prepared. The building was small, just an old maintenance warehouse they'd leased and cleaned up, but the 6 trucks parked beside it gleamed in the morning sun like fresh uniforms waiting for their first day of duty. Mike Riley stood near the first one, tightening a strap on the trailer. The truck bore a matte navy finish, with the company name painted in clean white letters, Convoy Banks, Veterans Moving Forward. It had taken every ounce of grit, faith, and stubbornness to get here. The startup fleet included a mix of refurbished rigs, each maintained with care by volunteers and veterans who hadn't worked in years. There were only 3 routes to start, one running produce out of Kansas, another delivering construction materials through Iowa, and a third hauling pharmaceuticals to small clinics in rural Illinois. But they were moving. Mike wasn't just overseeing operations. He insisted on driving the lead rig himself. "Best way to earn respect," he'd told Daniel. "Get behind the wheel." His route began that afternoon, but this morning was different. It was the launch. The lot filled slowly, veterans in old uniforms, families holding small flags, a local high school band playing a few feet away under a patched tent. Someone from the city council brought folding chairs. A barbecue smoker hissed gently in the distance. A local bakery donated cookies. Mike didn't know most of the people, but they seemed to know him. Rachel stood by the podium in a pale green dress and denim jacket, holding a small stack of notes. Her hands didn't shake. She looked proud. Daniel stood behind her in a black button-down and rolled sleeves dusted with grit from helping unload folding tables an hour earlier. When the band quieted, Rachel stepped forward and cleared her throat. "This convoy is more than a company," she began. "It's a second chance. for those who served, for those who came home and didn't know where to go next, and for those still trying to make sense of the road behind them. She looked at Mike as she spoke. This isn't about hauling freight. It's about carrying the weight that others forgot, and honoring the people who still carry it every day. Mike looked down, jaw tight. Then came a voice from the crowd. "Excuse me. I believe I have something for Mr. Riley. Eugene." He stepped forward carrying a handcrafted wooden display case. At its center was a velvet-lined space, empty, waiting. Surrounding it were other tokens. A faded pilot's logbook, a rusted dog tag, a photo of a smiling Navy medic from '71. "These were donated," Eugene said, "by families who were touched by this project, by what it stands for. And there's a place here for the medal that started it all." Mike reached into his pocket, pulled out the Distinguished Service Cross, and slowly placed it into the center slot. The crowd watched in silence as the medal clicked softly into place. No longer a symbol of the past, but now part of something moving forward. He turned to Deshawn, who stood off to the side holding his son's hand. "One of them," Eugene said gently, "belonged to Deshawn's brother. He died in a training accident. Never saw combat. But his family wanted him remembered too." Deshawn's eyes glistened. He nodded once, quietly. The display case was mounted on the wall inside the dispatch office, just above the entry door. But a replica of the Distinguished Service Cross, the one that started it all, was fixed inside the lead truck's cab, behind protective glass, visible to every driver who took the wheel. It wasn't just a decoration. It was a reminder of what they were driving for. Not just medals, memories. That afternoon, the ribbon was cut. Mike climbed into the cab of his truck, clean shirt, dog tag hanging from the mirror, and turned the key. The engine came alive with a low, steady growl. He looked out the window at the crowd. Then he saw her, Vanessa Kerr, dressed in a sharp gray suit, standing beside a pair of news reporters. The press pass around her neck gleamed. Kerr looked unimpressed, as if waiting for the project to collapse under its own weight. She was banking on failure, hoping for it. Mike didn't blink. He reached for the CB mic and clicked it on. "Convoy banks, first load rolling," he said. "Let's make it count." One by one, the trucks pulled forward, the low rumble of diesel engines blending with cheers. Small-town mayors waved from the curb. Veterans saluted. Some cried. A local reporter from Channel 9 leaned into the mic. "This isn't just a startup," she said. "This is a movement." Vanessa didn't speak, but her jaw was tight as she watched the crowd grow, watched the support he hadn't predicted, and the trucks kept rolling. Miles down the road, Mike drove in silence. The landscape passed in soft flashes. Farmhouses, wheat fields, old motels clinging to forgotten highways. But there was something new in the way he gripped the wheel. Not tight with stress or tension, but firm with purpose. He wasn't just moving freight. He was carrying names, carrying brothers who didn't make it. The hope for men like Deshawn who'd given up on ever being part of something again. Adam too. At a rest stop later that day, Mike stepped down from the cab and looked at the side of the truck. The words Convoy Banks were framed against the sky, clean and bold. He looked at the case mounted beside the door. His medals, Adam's photo, Deshawn's brother's ribbon. Others he hadn't even known, now part of the journey. Rachel pulled up beside him and stepped out. "Thought you could use a sandwich," she said, handing him a brown paper bag. He chuckled, taking it. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I know," she said, smiling, "but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun lower behind the trailers. "You think this'll work?" he asked quietly. Rachel looked at the trucks, the men fueling up, the kids playing in the grass nearby. "I think it already is." Mike nodded, and as he climbed back into the truck, the sky turning gold and the convoy getting ready to move again, he realized something. He wasn't lost anymore. He had a road ahead, and this time it led somewhere worth going. This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of dignity spark movements larger than anyone imagined. What would you do if someone handed you a second chance? Not just for yourself, but for others. Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more. See you in the next video.